I'm Dr. Richard Burchill, the Director of Research and Engagement for Trends Research and Advisory. We're in Washington, D.C. today with the Stimson Center and the Orfalea Center from the University of California, Santa Barbara for a conference on confronting the challenges to global security created by Daesh. I'm joined this morning with Professor Breen-Smyth from the University of Massachusetts at Boston. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
In your presentation this morning, you were talking about some of the global approaches to terrorism and how they're ineffective. I wonder if you just elaborate a bit more on that from your own experiences with Northern Ireland.
Well, from my own experiences in Northern Ireland and also in South Africa and in the Middle East, where I've also worked, it does seem to me that the lessons of history are that military approaches to these problems, which very often have underlying fundamental political issues unaddressed, are very often counterproductive. And very often what you're dealing with is a mutually escalating conflict where the military intervention on the part of the state aimed at containing or ending terrorism, in fact, is throwing gas on the fire. It's actually escalating the problem and making it much worse. And unfortunately, we did say this about the war on terror back in 2005 when we set up critical terrorism studies. And I have no pleasure in saying that, in fact, our predictions have largely been proven to be true, because we now have a situation where the war on terror, which has largely adopted a militaristic and hardline approach to the problem of terrorism, has in fact left Americans particularly less safe than they were at the outset.
But equally, aren't governments in a difficult position? That I understand the move to militarism and how it's been problematic, and almost, as you say, it's creating a whole different set of problems. But what can governments do, though? Because I know we do need to address the underlying causes, the core causes, but equally society wants to feel safe and secure.
Yes, well, I think the first thing that needs to happen in relation to society and making people feel safe and secure is that we have to actually address the manufacture of fear and the role of the media in particular in spreading that fear, and the way in which particular civilian, I have to say, politicians capitalize on that to drum up business for themselves. I think we really need to educate the public about the actual fact of the range of risks that face them as a public and how terrorism fits into that range of risks. And usually you will find that terrorism, in the scale of things, is a small risk in comparison to, for example, road accident deaths, which are in most societies, in fact, almost every society one can think of, is a much more substantial risk than terrorism. I notice that you're having John Mueller here later, and John Mueller says that the average American has more chance of drowning in a toilet than they have of being killed by terrorism. Absolutely. So that's the first thing, I think, educating the public and not allowing politicians with other agendas to capitalize on public fear and indeed to fan the flames of that fear, because that's a retrograde direction. Absolutely. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we have in the ordinary criminal justice system, which offers protections to those accused of crimes, by the way, and that they have the right to remain silent, they have the right to defense, they have a right to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and they have the right to a determinate sentence. And those are the kinds of protections that the criminal law offers, and there is absolutely no reason in the minds of many people who actually work in counterterrorism that the ordinary criminal law will not suffice in addressing terrorism. Absolutely. We also talked today about the dangers in the minds of some people of the risk of radicalization in prison. Well, we know that actually that does happen. It has happened in my country in Northern Ireland when we had imprisonment without due process. When you intern people in the likes of Guantanamo Bay, and particularly when you breach their human rights and practice torture, and you breach all of the international conventions, then you do radicalize people. Right. If people feel that they have a chance to defend themselves, that they have due process, when they go to prison, then rather different things happen. And the state controls the prisons. They can make available education, they can make rehabilitation available, and so on. The outcomes can be very different indeed, and much more productive.
Now, the importance of education, I think, is key. It's absolutely vital, and I think, unfortunately, not enough people are starting to look into that really closely on how societies can be educated. But a lot of what you said was we almost need to educate the politicians, the state. on how to approach this. Now, given the long, unfortunate experience we've had with terrorism, how can we educate states essentially to take a more pragmatic approach and not make matters worse?
Well, how do we change our political leadership is the question, I think.
Yes.
How do we actually, and either we change the personnel or we change the mindset. And it does seem to me that we're living, I mean, it is a Chinese curse after all, may you live in interesting times, but we are living in interesting times politically. You've seen a growing discontent in the part of the population with the political establishment. It seems to me that that discontent can be a positive thing. And actually, if we can transform the political establishment into one which better understands and has an interest in investing in their own understanding of these things in the longer term. The difficulty, I think, with a lot of politicians is they serve a term of office and they're interested primarily in re-election. And I think that needs to change. We somehow need to address that, and we need to make better choices as a democracy politically in educating leaders that are not self-serving but are actually in it for the long haul and who have a track record in investing in the long term.
Right, great. And as you say, we certainly are in interesting times. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very
for joining
welcome,
us today.
and thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thanks.